Right.
This meeting is being recorded.
Got it.
Okay. Most of you won't know this, but Robert has been a dear friend of mine since in the early 80s. He came to Midwestern to teach for a few years there. He invited me to preach his inauguration as pastor of First Baptist Shelby, North Carolina, and I chose as the text the reference to someone in whom there is no guile. Robert is true blue. He is a dear friend, and I should not take time to talk about personal things, but he is someone to be trusted. He's someone to be relied upon. You want to be on Robert's team. And I'm so glad that he can be our leadoff speaker.
Right. Come over here and look at this.
Anyway, Robert, the Dean of the Divinity School at Gardner Webb University. Robert.
Well, thank you, Bob. You're very kind, and yes, there is plenty of guile in me. Let's clear the air on that one. But it's good to see everybody around the screen. I'm looking at former professors of mine from once upon a time, Dr. Rowett, Larry McSwain, and I could not, pass the opportunity, and that's why the background that I've chosen for my Zoom is Gerald Cowan. He and I were standing side by side at the Temple Mount. This was back in about 2013, and I know that many of you on screen know Gerald and remember him fondly. He and I, were privileged to work together for a while. I've been here now 20, how many years? 23 years. And about 20 of those years, Gerald and I worked together. I came as the associate dean originally to the school. And then after some years was named as dean. At the time I was named dean, Gerald became the associate dean. And of course, we had great friendship through those years. And certainly tracked his journey even after he retired, from us here at Gardner Webb, with his untimely diagnosis with leukemia and, or I should say, bone cancer and bone marrow cancer, and ultimately his passing. Have maintained close contact, of course, with his wife, Sharon, since then, and she's in good shape for the most part, and a great lady in every way. You all, of course, will remember Sharon as well as you will Gerald. So anyway, that I just couldn't pass the opportunity to keep him on the screen behind me so that you all could get a good look at him at that point. But yeah, I did. I came to Gardner Webb from the pastorate. Bob mentioned being part of the installation service when I came to Shelby, North Carolina, which is the nearby city to Gardner Webb. Gardner Webb is actually in a little town called Boiling Springs, town of maybe 1,500 people. Shelby is a nearby town of about 20,000 people. And in 1997, I came to Shelby due in part to the influence of another Southern Seminary grad, Wayne Stacy. Some of you will remember Wayne through the years. Wayne and I taught with Bob at Midwestern. I was there for a couple of years from 87 to 89. You all know what was happening between 87 and 89 in Southern Baptist life. So I ducked away from academics at that point, and moved to be a pastor in Iowa, and was a pastor there, and then in the DC area, and then ultimately came to First Baptist Shelby, due for the most part to the influence of Wayne Stacy, who I had met and taught at Midwestern together with. So that just gives you a little bit of backstory on how I have come to be here, at least at this place. Any question about any of that? All that makes sense so far? So anyway, when I came here, which was in the year 2000, I transitioned from First Shelby to Gardner Webb. There was another important Southern seminary person here besides Wayne and besides Gerald. And some of you will remember her, Mary Alice Seals. Mary Alice, as you will recall, worked in the School of Music at Southern for many years, she and I actually knew each other, and she was in a different role, obviously, than I was at the time when I was a doctoral student at Southern. But we had maintained a friendship and a relationship through the years. She was at the time when I came to Shelby, the associate dean at the School of Divinity, and was a member at First Baptist Shelby. So we reconnected that way. But in the year 2000, she transitioned away from the School of Divinity and moved to First Baptist Raleigh, where she basically lived out the balance of her career as the minister of music at First Raleigh. She is retired from there a couple of years ago now. But anyway, that was another Southern connection when I came to Gardner Webb. Let's see. Likewise, when I came out here in the undergraduate religious studies department, Kent Blevins, that may be a name that you remember. He studied in ethics with Glenn Stassen. Let's see. Ron Williams was here as well. And I know he worked together with Bob at Southern. I think Ron worked, I think, as your associate when you were in the boys' school, right, Bob? Am I right about that? Yeah, you're muted, but I think that's right.
Right.
So those Southern connections were there. And then, of course, Mary High, who Bob reminded me of, she has been at Gardner Webb as long as I've been here. She came shortly after I did, at least, American Sign Language. But she did a PhD under Dr. Wayne Ward's tutelage, probably in the early 90s at Southern, and then came here and has been here her entire career. So yeah, those are among the Southern. Let's see, Danny West. He worked in preaching with Ken Chafin at Southern back many years ago, and he came to Gardner Webb to be with us in the School of Divinity. So we've had a lot of Southern folk who've been at our school. All of those folks have now retired. I'm the lone holdout so far. Let's see. I was gifted on the 1st of September this year to receive my Medicare card. So that tells you exactly what age I am now. Of course, when I was at Southern, you will remember me because I had very dark hair, and Bob, well, he had a little bit darker hair than he has not right now, but not much. But anyway, that was part of our story there. Let's see, what else can I say? Our school, like many of the schools, was among one of the first schools associated with Cooperative Baptist Fellowship when Southern Baptists were doing whatever they were doing. So we became a school in 1993. So we were earlier than Wake. We were earlier than Campbell's Divinity School. Earlier, yes, than Truett. We were one of the earlier schools among the newer schools at the time, and that's due in part to the then president of Gardner Webb, who was Dr. Chris White. Many of you know and have tracked his story. He left here few years into my time being here, moved over to Chowan, and he is now retired, and I think just celebrated his 80th birthday. But anyway, he had the vision back then to see more or less where things were going, with the seminaries, and kind of got in on the ground floor of theological education then. And we've been obviously doing this now for about 25, 26 years. So it's been an interesting journey. Lot of changes, no doubt. David, I think you're muted. You might be asking a question, but
There we go.
okay.
I was just going to say, when I was a freshman at Mercer, Chris White was my resident advisor on our hall.
Of all things, how about that? Okay, all right.
When he went off to seminary, he left a little halftime church, and he left it to me to follow him. So
Okay. Well, he and I have been close friends. He was actually chairman of deacons at First Baptist Shelby in the year 1997 when I came there to be pastor. So he and I met then and got to know each other in that role first. And then, 3-4 years later, he came to me and said, I need you out at the Divinity School. What do you think? And I said, probably not a good idea, but obviously he won out on that one too. So I came, and in all fairness, we have maintained a close friendship through the years. He lives in Charlotte, which isn't far from Gardner Webb, and he and I are in a email or text message exchange probably every month. So he and Linda are doing well. So I'll have to remember you, David, to him whenever I see him.
Please do.
I will do that for sure, for sure. Let's see, Bob. Well, you wanted me to maybe share a few things about what some of the things, good things that have happened, through our school, and that usually is tied to students. Of course, students today are not the students that we once were. You might remember, some of you, Dr. Rowan, I know you will, Andy, you probably will as well. My particular generation, and Dr. McSwain will as well, my particular generation of doctoral students, PhD students at Southern, we were the first ones allowed to use a PC for our dissertations. And I know that met with some pushback and some resistance from the older guard there who said, wait a minute, you can't use a PC. That's not your work. If you're not spelling every word and you're running it through a spell checker, that's not your work. That's an atrocity. But nevertheless, the school did allow that to happen. And of course, we know where we are in that world right now. But I left Southern after finishing MDiv and PhD, and due in large part to William Hendrick's relationship and friendship to Milton Ferguson. They, you might recall, were roommates or classmates at least at Oklahoma Baptist University way back in the day. And when I finished at Southern, having done work both in New Testament and in theology, Midwestern needed someone who could cover sabbatical leaves for Hewlett Glower and the theologian, let's see, who was that? Vernon Davis. They were both scheduled or slated for back-to-back years of sabbatical. And so they brought me in so that I could cover those sabbatical leaves for them. And that's how I ended up at Midwestern, again, because of William Hendrick's influence. I fellowed for him from the time he came to Southern, when he was, director of the doctoral programs there. I think, Dr. McSwain, I think you were doing right much in administration then too, as I recall, weren't you?
Yes, I was in that, particularly from 85 forward.
Right.
Was dean for a couple of years and provost.
That's what I was remembering. I was doing PhD from 84 to 87. And so it was right during that time. So I remember being up in that administrative suite and walking, past your world there on my way to do things for Dr. Hendricks at that time. Yeah. But again, when I left there and went out to Midwestern, that's where Bob and I met. And Bob took me under wing and kind of showed me how to and how not to do it at Midwestern. And I don't think I'd been there even 2 years when he decided he would bail ship. And that's when he came out to Kentucky. That's when he came to Louisville and landed there. I, of course, while at Southern, was a good friend to Al Mohler. Dare I say that now? But yeah, I was a good friend to Al Mohler. We came through the doctoral work together. His wife and my wife were social friends. In fact, they've maintained a friendship. It's a Christmas letter exchange sort of thing through the years. None of us, of course, knew, what Al was up to or what he might inevitably do at Southern under, as the leader there. But Bob, actually, I think Al hired you, didn't he, Bob? Wasn't he president when you came there? Or am I thinking wrongly?
3 years under Roy.
Under Roy. Okay, gotcha. And then Al came, and then shortly thereafter you.
In 93.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. So anyway,
Willis
those were.
Bennett asked him not to fire me.
Okay.
Willis Bennett went to bat for me with Al.
All right. Well, and I want to say that Al actually reached out to me about you too. And I could not say enough bad about you to get you fired. So obviously you stayed on under him.
Are you serious?
I'm serious. I am. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Right. But
Wow.
go ahead.
I just said, wow.
Oh, okay, yeah, the world increasingly gets smaller and smaller, doesn't it? Well, our program, here at Gardner Webb in the School of Divinity, we primarily exist to prepare, men and women for pastoral ministry. With that, of course, means that we have right many women. In fact, right now, we're 50-50 male-female. We're also 50-50 African-American and Anglo. That's our demographic, which is kind of interesting. When I came to the school in the year 2000, we were about 85% male and 15% female. And we were about 95% Anglo and only 5% African-American. So during my years here, obviously, that demographic has shifted pretty dramatically. In the association, the Baptist Association where our school is located, we now have several females who are pastors of Baptist churches here, which is a bit of an anomaly yet even in this area. So those are among some of the things that we have been able to celebrate, including a number of our African American students who come our way who are now dually aligned with their Baptist denomination and Cooperative Baptist Fellowship. So those kind of things have been positive and affirming. We do offer the DMin degree here. That came online pretty quickly after I started here. I think about 2002, 2003 was our first DMin class, and we obviously have sustained that ever since. We had about less than 100 students when I came in 2000, and then about the year about 2013, 12 or 13, when I've been here in my role as dean about 10 years, our numbers increased at the master's level to over 200 students. But we've now pulled back, and we have probably about 100 MDiv students and about 35 DMin students. So we're still a very small school, but we're facing the same sort of thing that all of our sister schools, from Duke Divinity, who has a Baptist house, to Campbell, to Wake Forest. Every one of us in a recent meeting, we all are bemoaning the fact that we have fewer students coming to us seeking ministerial preparation than we have historically known. Our numbers are just down. That seems to be following in part, I think, the path that churches are following these days. And you all are in churches, and you know what our numbers don't look like today in comparison to what they once did look like. That said, our African American churches tend to be very strong, comparatively speaking, to many of our Anglo churches, for which reason more than 50% of our students are African American. We likewise are seeing right many African American females who are a part of our school, which is also encouraging. Many of them, however, have no expectation of becoming pastor of their congregation, but their pastors have encouraged them to get a theological education because they will be assisting those pastors in support roles, Bible teaching and other kinds of things in their congregation. So that's I somehow muted myself. That's been an interesting development in our world and at our school to watch African American females become a significant part of our population here. We have been blessed, financially, so that the majority of our students can come and get a theological education without taking on any educational debt. When I assumed the role of dean of the school back in about 2008-9, the big thing that ATS, the Association of Theological Schools, was telling us was, you got to figure out a way, all of you schools, to keep students from taking on additional educational debt, because the likelihood of them being able to pay back their educational debt on a minister's salary is not going to be very high. So figure out a way to, to fix that problem. So I have spent the majority of my career doing that, making this degree, financially feasible. And that, of course, is dependent in large part upon donors and people who have gotten to know us, who trust that the theological education that we're going to provide is going to be helpful and beneficial to them in their churches. So we're grateful that we have those kind of donors. And the reason, looking back at that photograph that you're seeing, in my background there, we have consistently taken students to the Holy Land and/or Greece and Turkey, to the Bible lands, every year, with the exception of years when there's been, unrest in those regions. We have an endowment that pays for 3/4 of the cost for a student to travel there, which these days is about $5,000 to spend 11 days at any of these Bible land sites. And we can scholarship our students some $4,000 or more dollars. And a couple of other of our agencies that we're friends with likewise contribute, and many of those students can make that trip without paying even a penny. So we consider that to be a great gift that we can give students. I know all of you have made that trip before, and I was privileged to spend a sabbatical over there at 10 Ecumenical Institute, that is owned and operated by Notre Dame. Surprising to me, when I got there, I discovered that Wayne Ward, who was my doctoral supervisor at Southern, had actually done a sabbatical there himself nearly 40 years ago. So wow, small world to know that he had done that too. So that's a fascinating place, obviously, and we can talk more about that in a little bit if we want to. Again, our students finish the MDiv with us for the most part, and I'll tell you a couple of good success stories about a couple of our students, one of whom is actually in Kentucky. April Simpson is professor of New Testament at Georgetown University. She's been there only 2 years now, but she finished MDiv with us a good many years ago. Finished her PhD at SMU in New Testament, and was hired on at Georgetown. So she's nearby to you all, and is a great ambassador for our school, because she knows the quality education she received here, and will encourage her undergraduate religion majors to come our way. So she's near you all, and again is a wonderful success story for part of what we do in our world here at Gardner Webb. Another story I'll tell you, a young man from the community in near Bowling Springs here, went off to the one of the Gulf Wars, came back and was hooked on OxyContin due to some injuries that he sustained there, and found himself with that, in essence, drug addiction, face down on a prison cell floor in the local jail system here. Awakened from that and realized, what life had done to him, and how he basically was squandering his life and his opportunities. I met him at church, and he reached out to me and asked, would it be possible for him to come to School of Divinity? And I said, well, I know your story. I know what's in your background or whatever, but let's give this a chance. Let's see what happens here. Well, the long and short of his story is, he experienced a marvelous calling, of course, and a marvelous transformation in his life. The end result of which is he did finish MDiv with us, excelled at every level while he was here as a student, took GRD, made preparations for PhD studies, and was accepted at Asbury, another Kentucky connection, at Asbury Theological Seminary about 5 years ago, and was given their highest academic fellowship, and wrote a dissertation on the book of Revelation, a book that I had introduced him to, because that has been an avocation of mine while teaching here. And so he finished a PhD there, having written a dissertation, and has recently been published in Novum Testamentum. So, I mean, he has done everything that anybody in academics would ever dream to do. So, I mean, here's a story from basically what? Face down in a prison cell in his own urine, as he said, to this remarkable thing, that has happened in his life. He asked me when he was making preparation for doing doctoral study, how much of that story should he tell? I said, well, tell as much of it as you think will ever come out at some point, because if it comes out and you haven't told it, somebody might perceive you to have hidden those things. I said, so tell your story. And he told that story, and Asbury embraced the transformation that had happened in his life. And again, he's done some remarkable things that I don't think anybody would have imagined. So he probably has excelled as much academically among our graduates for the 20 years that we've been here as anybody in terms of academic life. What awaits him moving forward, we watch with some expectation to see where he might end up. So I've been just roaming here and rattling for a while, but that's kind of what our school is and kind of what we're about. And I'd love to get you all in the conversation, talking to me a little bit, if you will. You're muted, Bob.
He's written a book on atonement in the
apocalypse.
apocalypse.
Yeah, there it is. It sits here on my desk. You probably can't see it.
Subtitle, expose of the defeat of evil. A word about your book, and I bought a copy of it. I can't find it.
Okay. Yeah. While I was on sabbatical. While I was on sabbatical in anticipation of going, and it was unusual, by the way, for the university to grant me, an administrator, a sabbatical. But I went to my superiors and I said, look, I've been here now at that point about 17 years. And while I know that you don't ordinarily allow administrators, in our role as administrators, we both do administration and we teach as well. Now I'm about 3/4 administrator and 1/4 teacher. But I said to them, I think I deserve this, and I prevailed, and they did give me time to do the sabbatical, because I had been the one person who did teach the book of Revelation here. There's the book. Wow, somebody's smart with technology.
Andy. That's Andy.
Well done, Andy. Because of my interest in the book, reaching back to a PhD seminar in New Testament Greek that in the book of Revelation that I did with James Blevins. That's a name that you'll remember. I developed a keen interest in the book, and of course, most anywhere you would go as a pastor, teach the book. That would always be the question. And so, out of that, and then moving forward, doing academic work, I discovered something in the book that no one seemingly had addressed. And you can see Mitchell Reddish's name there. That's another connection to Southern going back. I sent him a couple of chapters of what I anticipated would be this book and said, what do you think? And he said, you have to publish this. This is absolutely this is uncharted territory in many ways for the book. And I was encouraged that he gave it, that high praise. So that prompted in part my doing this. The primary focus of the book really rests in chapter 12, which is that fascinating chapter where there's a woman, who's clothed in the sun and the moon's beneath her feet. And there's all kind of mythological overlay that's happening in that book or in that chapter. And so in the book, I try to unpack, in essence, every atonement-related term or concept that one might know, traditionally and historically, and then to talk about what different thing John is doing with his exposition of it. So Bob reached out to me, gosh, that was back, I guess, during COVID, wasn't it, Bob, when you were running that online Sunday school class that was reaching people all over the world?
Yeah.
And said, as only Bob, the consummate educator that he is, if you had only one lesson that you wanted to teach, what would it be? And I thought, what would that be? And I said, well, it has to be Revelation 12. And so for that reason, he asked me to in essence, teach that lesson, which I think took more than one lesson to get through it. But we had 4 or 5 or 6 weeks together with his Sunday school class, talking about the upshot of what's in that book. You know, it's an academic work in large part, so you know it was fun to do and tough. You know, writing is not easy, but I was pleased to be able to do that. Obviously, as an administrator, you spend your time writing other kind of documents, and you don't write as much in your academic discipline as others that are just strictly academic in their field. So I was pleased to be able to do some little something at least while I've been here at this school.
Okay. Questions?
Robert, thank you for being here. I have 3 or 4 or 5 questions, but the one I want to ask first has to do with dealing with the African American churches. We too are that way, and I'm still doing CPE in the parish, and about a third of my students are African American, and we found that there's been a need to do a lot of cultural intersectionality to change how we teach, what we teach. You mentioned the female role, and often they will be associate pastors or such. How has Gardner Webb handled that? And what advice would you have for the rest of us as we look to the African American church for the greening of the church in general?
Okay, great question. When I took the role here, I was fortunate in as much as I had been a pastor in this area, and as a result of having been a pastor in the area, I met virtually all the pastors, be they Anglo pastors or African American pastors. And my standard question was, well, where did you do your theological education? And surprisingly, the overwhelming majority of them said, I didn't. I do, I maybe did some Bible courses now and again. I said, well, why haven't you done so? They said, well, where could we do it? I said, right out there at Gardner Webb. There's a school out there, a school of divinity, they would ask. I said, yeah. They said, well, we knew it had an undergrad world, but we did not know about that. And I said, oh, absolutely. It's there. And I said, and one of the unique things about this school is nearly every person who serves on the faculty has had significant experience as a pastor. And that made a real impact on them, because that's really the kind of theological education that they wanted. While academics, has an important role, and we never dial that back in the least, they needed to see the integration of that academics, with the practical ministry of the church. And I said, yeah, that can very much happen. And I will give the credit, for the most part, to Wayne Stacy, who was the second dean of the school, who, as I mentioned earlier, we taught together at Midwestern. He had been a pastor in Florida. And then when he left Midwestern, he moved out to First Baptist Raleigh and was a pastor there before coming to Gardner Webb. And we basically sat down together, he and I did, and said, hey, let's talk about, what we did get at Southern and what we did not get at Southern. And let's talk about what we sense the great need, for theological education to be, that could be kind of a niche for us. And so we said, yeah, that niche has to be, we are academics, but we also have a foot in academics and a foot likewise in the church. And so because we could speak the church language, and not just artificially, but we could speak it genuinely, that meant for those students, they had an immediate connection to us and with us. We also avoided any paternalism. And I think that's the key thing. We never said to them, look, whatever you did in the past as a pastor in your church, was insufficient, inadequate, or whatever. We never said that. We said, you bring a lot of skills and a lot of questions to the classroom that a traditional student doesn't bring. And we consider you to be collegial with us at that point. Now, us saying that to them, that opened doors that would otherwise be closed to them. And here's a sad commentary on the one hand on that part. So because we were seeing a growth in our African American population here, we said, you know what we need? We need an African American faculty member. And we worked super hard and looked and super long until we found a person who came to us. And little did we know that this person, when he would actually move into the African American church, he was guilty of paternalism. He was guilty of saying to them, in essence, you all have been doing this wrong. And that created animosity between the local churches and the person that we thought was going to be our greatest ambassador. And that was a sad reality, such that those pastors who had finished degrees with us, to whom this particular faculty member was going and talking about their churches, to and with them, contacted me and said, don't send this guy out here anymore. We'd rather have one of you all, because you don't treat us, you don't relate to us that way. So as I'm describing this, I'm not, throwing this former colleague under the bus, but I'm just observing, what I found.
Was he he was African American?
He was.
I have found the sense of authority to be different among that. African American pastors carry more authority and tend to be more paternal, and that's a part of what happens in the church sometimes. So I'm kind of not surprised, but I do see the competitiveness between them and the difficulty in letting one of them tell them what to do.
Particularly in his case, he was an outsider, and he had not earned the right to speak to them at that level. I tried to say to him, look, go there, do your Bible stuff, demonstrate, those capacities first, and then get into the polity. But I think he couldn't hold back, saying to them, you all just aren't doing church the way you should do church. And that was disastrous, unfortunately. Now, in our school, Wade, you know one of our pastoral care and counseling persons, Doug Dickens. Doug has been a great asset to us in helping our African American students and our ministers, because many, I'd say the majority of our African American students who are pastors, even the female students, that's their concentration. They concentrate in pastoral care and counseling because they had not had formal training at that level to address those kind of deep needs in their congregations.
And I found more of their congregants come to them for help with family problems, legal problems, drug problems, addiction problems, and that's a different curriculum than maybe First Baptist Church in most southern towns would be.
You're exactly right. And so, with our faculty members, and Doug has good sensitivities, in terms of how to approach, persons of color and the like, such that he doesn't come across paternalistic, and he gets to know them, and they trust him, and that's essential. Alongside Doug, of course, our other pastoral care and counseling person is Aber Palomino, who is from Colombia, whose complexion is, his ethnicity is a combination of African and Hispanic, Latino, what have you. But he relates equally well, to our African American students and avoids those kind of pitfalls that sometimes one could fall into that would create barriers rather than open doors between us. I don't know if I answered all of your question or questions, but that's just my observation.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering what you're doing with online learning. Are you heavily into that?
Great question. We are about 25% online. So we still believe that embedded theological education is to be preferred, for which reason we are only 25%. That said, hybrid, I think, is the better word than online. I think that's the way that we're going. Point being, you can do online and be successful at it. But if you do a hybrid model whereby you do partial online and then some face-to-face, then you have, I think, the best of both worlds. In other words, for the non-traditional student, who's working a job and doing other things, who would need and benefit potentially from the education they could get, who would need the online format so that they could do their assignments and do their work during, asynchronously, but yet to require them, to come to a class once, twice, 3 times a semester, that seems to be the sweet spot, I think, for online and or theological education for the moment. That said, we do have, as I said, 25% of our 78 hours. One can do an MDiv. It was 90 hours or 93 when I was at Southern. That was kind of the high end. And one can do an MDiv for 72 hours. That's the low end of how many hours. So we were 90 for most of our years, but we've dialed back to 78 in an attempt to be competitive with others that are doing, that kind of an MDiv. So of our 78 hours, students, again, can do about 5 classes online, totally online, completely online. The hybrid model, from accrediting perspectives and from donor perspectives, is considered the same as full-time or full-time face-to-face, as long as you don't exceed so many. If you have more hours that are face-to-face than are online, then you're in the good spot there. So that's
Is
what
your online synchronous or asynchronous?
it's asynchronous, right? Yeah. So that, again, that provides greater flexibility for delivery of the courses and the like. And one of our major donors, who is now reaches out even into Kentucky, the Cassie Foundation. Many of you will know that name. It's located in Martinsville, Virginia. Cassie was a furniture manufacturer. Passed away, did he and his wife, without any living heirs, and basically gave their full earnings to the Cassie Educational Fund. And they exist expressly to prepare Baptist ministers for work in congregations. That's the general way to describe it. And for them, they do not pay for any fully online course. They still believe that face-to-face is the best way for theological education to prepare persons for real life ministry. So that encourages and influences us in many ways to avoid too many online classes, because many of our students are recipients of that Cassie grant money, and we have to make up the difference if we're going to help those students continue taking classes when they fall outside the criteria for Cassie grants. So that's what we're doing. Follow up, Andy, or is that?
I just noticed that Southern has started a program where they've created an incentive for people to come to campus. I assume because of the lure of online learning, you now only have to pay for 8 or 9 hours, and you can take as many hours as you like on campus, but you only pay for 8 or 9, but that's not true. Online, you have to pay for all of them online. So that creates an incentive to come.
Yeah, that would, wouldn't it? They're making you pay the money. Yeah, interesting.
Robert, this is Larry. Did Charles Bug teach for a brief period of time with you?
Yeah, I meant when I did my introduction to say we're missing Charles Bug. He sent me a voicemail. He usually is in this circle of
Yeah.
people here. He sent me a voicemail about 3 weeks ago when he knew I was going to be doing this, and apologized that he was going to be away. His daughter was home from Australia or whatever, and that he was going to be with them. Yeah. When Wayne Stacy left as dean of the school back in 2001 or 2, I became the acting dean. Shortly thereafter, Chuck came here as dean. So I then rolled back to being associate dean and worked as the associate dean while he was dean. And he was dean here probably 3, maybe 4, 2, 3, 4 years. And then left, and then I became the acting dean again, and then became the dean. So yeah, he was here. Sure was. In fact, the neighborhood in which I live is about 3 doors down from where he once lived in Boring Springs here. Yeah.
Do you get any state convention funding?
Good question. We do not get any direct state convention money. Reaching back to about 2011, all of the schools in North Carolina, Baptist schools, which once upon a time did get Baptist State Convention money, we all decided that rather than allowing the convention to give us trustees, as has historically been the pattern here, we pulled away from that financial support in order that we might name our own trustees. So beginning in 2011-ish here at Gardner Webb, we started pulling away from that direct financial support from the state convention. That said, churches, meanwhile, nevertheless continued to send their mission support for theological education, and included Gardner Webb, Campbell, and a couple of the other Baptist schools in their financial support. So while we got no direct money from the Baptist State Convention, they basically took the funds that were coming into them and gave them over to the Baptist Foundation here in North Carolina. And the foundation has managed that money, and they send us and other of the Baptist schools, 2 others, Mars Hill College and Campbell, they send to us, it's roughly $15,000, $20,000 a year. It's not big money, but that was the state convention's way of trying to be fair, at least, with the monies that were coming in to them, and some that continue to come in from area churches. So that's a roundabout way of answering the question.
Can I ask another question about curriculum and Black pastors? Do you do anything particularly around social justice issues and get involved with them? Our pastors seem to be more politically involved.
Well, that's a great question, and I think the short answer is no. I mean, we take up, the social justice issues and the like in our courses, but in terms of any official activism related thereto, we do not. Our school has, for the most part, stayed out of activism at any level, be it that or any other perceived political area. Now, that said, while we don't do that officially, unofficially, any and all of us, exercise, those rights, and often go into African American congregations and talk about, how that can be done and how that should be done. But in terms of us as a school doing it, under my leadership at least, we have avoided that. I do know other of my colleague schools, like at Duke Divinity, for an example, they tend to be more politically active in that regard, as perhaps Wake Forest does the same thing. But that's just not been the way we have chosen to proceed. Some of my colleagues might have preferred us be more active like that. I've not played the heavy on that. I mean, I'm a voting member of the faculty like everyone else is, and I've not said, no, we don't do that. We just simply have not come together as a group and said, that's something that we really think we want to, that's not a hill we want to die on, so to speak, at this point. Yep. That said, you know, we have lectureships every year, and always in our lectureships, we do bring persons who do speak to, and often that is the theme and the subject of our lectureships. So we have indirect ways of doing that without taking official stances as an institution.
Fine,
Go ahead, Bob.
I'm back online. My internet quit working for a while. I'm on my phone now.
Okay.
So I'm glad y'all kept.
Yeah, we knew we lost you, but I thought maybe it was something I said that made you mad, but
No,
I'm kidding.
I've decided not to get mad anymore. We at Midwestern, we used to have basketball on Thursday afternoon. Of course, Robert's about 20 years younger than I am, so we had lots of fun. That was a great time of fellowship at Midwestern.
Yeah, those were good days. They were fun.
Well, do we have more questions?
I have one more. If there were one thing you could do in the world of theological education that would generate excitement, a difference in where we are at this point in history, what would that be? If there's one thing you could wish for Gardner Webb that you think would make the most significant influence for your future, what would that be?
Well, I have to say this kind of guardedly. I know this is being recorded. For the first time in Gardner Webb's history, we have a person who is president of the university who isn't from a Baptist background and who doesn't know, you know, the Baptist ethos. For which reason I remain somewhat fearful that our school may go the way in future days that other church-related schools have once upon a time gone. Now, he's not said that directly to us, but he wants the school, the university, to be viable, you know, financially and in other ways. And with the church in decline and shrinking, and Baptist, you know, being polarized as we often are, I'm fearful that that might happen. So I think implied in that observation is maybe the answer of the thing that I wish that we could do that would hold on to us, somehow holding on to our Baptist identity, our historical Baptist identity, without it becoming politicized and polarizing. That I think is essential to who and what I would like my legacy to be remembered in terms of what I try to do in my role as a dean here.
When you have faculty vacancies, where do you look to replace them?
Yeah, and that's a great question too. Baylor has been one of our, you know, primary places at which we look, but it isn't just there. You know, there are other schools. Princeton, we have folks who come from these schools. Vanderbilt, so they come from a variety of other places. They don't come from any of the Southern Baptist seminaries any longer. We've not hired anyone from any of those institutions since I've been here, and we don't plan to. During my time. So we find them, you know, from other places like that. You know, the young woman who I mentioned who's at Georgetown, she would probably be a good candidate for our school in a few years when she is a little older. And she did her PhD at SMU. So, but she is Baptist nevertheless, for which reason she's been well received at Georgetown. So, you know, we will find other you know, PhD granting institutions from which we will call our, you know, our faculty here. So they come from all over.
Yeah. It's wonderful to hear you.
Well, thank you. Good. Yeah.
This is sort of connected to where you find faculty, but let's go back 30 years. After 1990, do you think, and let's admit that Southern Seminary produced some fine PhD students who went on to teach in different places between 1985 and 1980 to 1990. I wonder, has anyone ever thought or heard anyone talk that how many good teachers decided to go the pastorate route because of the controversy and not to take jobs on faculties in our schools? Does that question make any sense to you guys, and to you, Robert? Did the pool shrink because of the controversy? The faculty pool shrink?
Well, I don't think the pool shrunk initially. But you're right. Many of us, myself included. I mean, I was teaching at a theological seminary at Midwestern Seminary from 1987 to 1989. And in 1989, Milton Ferguson came to me and said, "We want to create a position for you on the faculty." At the same time he came to me to ask that question, there were fundamentalists, self-identified fundamentalist trustees on Midwestern's trustee board who likewise came to me and said, "We want you on the faculty there. If you're willing to be what? You're willing to be, you know, in lockstep with us for what our plans are for Midwestern Seminary." Now, I chose to step away from that and to leave the academic world, theological education, to go to the pastorate because I didn't want to live in that world. You know, I just didn't want that. At that time, when I made that decision to leave to go there, there were PhD students coming out of Southern and elsewhere, other of the Southern Baptist schools, that were eager to get the position I left behind. And sometimes they did that because they had a call to teach, and they didn't have a call or maybe even a capacity to work in the church. They just knew that wasn't who they were. And so I think they were willing for a season at least, compromise might be the wrong word, but you know, to try to make it work, you know, even in a seminary that they knew was going in a very different direction than our seminaries had historically gone. So for a number of years, there were still a great many PhD students that and graduates that they may have gone to the church, but many of them didn't go anywhere. They didn't go to the church, nor did they end up teaching. They went into other career paths altogether. Right, many of my own classmates never taught and never spent a day in the church. They just did other things.
Recording in progress.
I don't know if I'd answered in part your question, Darrell, but
Yes.
Robert,
Well,
thank you so much.
Go ahead.
I have another appointment and must leave, but I really appreciate your time and your leadership. Thank you.
well, I've enjoyed being with you, Wade. Good to see you again, sir. Yes, sir. Darrell, you were saying?
Well, and yes, I agree with what you're saying there. I'm one other little observation. This is a hard thing to maybe answer, but how much has Southern Seminary and its graduates contributed to the success of the new seminaries, over 10 new seminaries that were formed. Would they have done as well without the influence of Southern Seminary alumni?
That's a great question, and I think the short answer is, Southern in its history has absolutely helped us. I mean, I wouldn't be here were it not for Southern, nor would other of the schools. You know, Bill Leonard became the founding dean at Wake. Southern. Tim George went to Beeson. I mean, on and on we could go, naming different persons who went to different schools, all with Southern in their backstory. So yeah, Southern's influence continues. To what degree moving forward, I don't know. But at least there was certainly a season of doctoral students, PhD students coming out of Southern that have had tremendous impact on our smaller schools. Yeah. And frankly, if there weren't these new schools that popped up, there would not have been teaching positions for the overwhelming majority of Southern PhD graduates.
Mhm.
I mean, I wouldn't be teaching, I'm quite confident, in theological education were it not for Gardner Webb. I would have stayed in the church as a pastor. Now, Al Noller did want me potentially to come back to Southern, not knowing that, at the time whether I was gonna be in lockstep with him or not. But so I probably could have gone back there, but that wasn't who I was, and nor is it who I am. So yeah, these smaller schools that have popped up, they've had a great influence. Southern's influence continues there. Yeah. Something else from somebody?
Well, Robert, thank you, and interrupt me if anybody has another question, because we have time. But
well, I expect I have a couple more years left before I will finally say it's probably time for me to step aside. I mean, I don't see me doing this for many more years. As I mentioned earlier, I turned 65 back in September, and things are so different now with the way one has to do theological education. It may be time for somebody else to step in and try to provide leadership and guidance for how to do that better than I've done it.
let me, since we got a little time, let me tell you guys that I went to the Presbyterian Seminary here in Louisville really to hear and Bowden, who was being installed as a professor at the seminary, the Presbyterian Seminary, and she's Baptist, and apparently very popular with the students. And it was like a high school pep rally. That service was. They stood up and they beat on the seats whenever they mentioned her name. I had never seen anything like it in my life. So do y'all have that kind of?
We don't, but I'm going to recommend it the next time I speak in chapel.
I had never seen anything like it.
No, that's bizarre. In a good way, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, anything else, guys? Robert, I personally thank you for doing this, and you know how much you mean to me, and so forth. And I feel like you have helped answer some questions that really have come up in our meetings before, and we didn't have anybody on hand to answer those questions. And so I hope you all at least remember that we have had some things to discuss where we did need somebody that was active right then.
Well,
So,
I'm glad to help, and if something comes up in the future that maybe I can answer a question, just holler at me. I'll be glad to talk to you.
okay, all
Thank
right.
you so much.
Anything else? Yeah. Thank you.
All right, everybody.
Robert.
Yeah, thank you all. Have a good rest of your day. Hey, we have about 85 degrees here today. It's like summertime again after having some cold weather. So what's going to go with that?
Yeah.